My name's David Perkins. You can call me Izzy Zane if you like. Many people do. I don't know why. But what we have here is a really amazing group of people. Really smart, really talented, fairly good looking. What's left of them? One is, at least. And we represent, like 5 communes here? 4, 5, I don't know. Who's counting? But what we'd like to do is cover some ground about commune life. Drop City is obviously an important cultural milestone in our culture. It is in my personal mythology. But we came for many reasons, from many places. We're not going to get into that. We're going to be very organic, not formal. So if you want to yell crazy stuff in the audience, please do. Questions, comments, obscenities, snide remarks, anything you feel like. This is the spirit of the communists, and it hasn't died yet. We have a very distinguished panel with Chip Baker over here on my right, far right. Chip and I were just talking. I've known Chip longer than anybody in this room.
Hey, Doctor.
Back to 1963 in Atlanta, Georgia, which Chip was my first guitar guru. And you were just born. Then we have Elaine Baker, brilliant lady she is, and Chip and Elaine, of course, are well known in this community for being aware for people from way, way back in every aspect of the community. AAA commune.
And the only original marriage that made it through.
All right. 50 years? Whoa! You're going to have to tell us some secrets about that one. Then we have, of course, Pat McMahon, local hometown girl, made good. And she's well known and quite popular in this town, I understand. Then we have, of course, Dean Fleming. We all know Dean, I think most of you do. Dean was actually at Drop City.
Yes.
For a while. And then went on to be a co-founder of Libre, which is also where I live. Then we have Nancy Brooks, who's a Red Rocker. All the way through. Still lives there. As I said, I'm David Perkins, and we have Jeff Briggs of the Orderbeast Farm. Pioneer all the way. Still here, still doing it, working strong, working hard. And then we have from New York City, Mr. Brooke Jones, who's our representative of the younger generation. And he's actually going to show us a PowerPoint presentation to get things started, sort of set the tone, the feeling, some of the things we're going to talk about. We will have a freewheeling discussion about many, many things, and I expect some questions. But my favorite topic, so I think all of us are quite well equipped to discuss communes, Drop City, the role of Drop City in this movement, whatever you call it. It still exists today. We're still doing it. So I don't know how much longer. Libre will be 50 coming up pretty soon. So we're getting primed from that. How many of you have been to a Libre party? All right, then. Okay, I know what kind of audience we have now. Anybody got any shrooms, man? Oh, never mind, later. Okay, so we believe in art, culture, music, love, and with that, I give you Mr. Brooke Jones, a renowned filmmaker and multi-talented person. Lay it on us, Brooke.
So, yeah, I'm a hippie, and I'm going to give a short PowerPoint presentation. And
That's probably the first time that those words have ever been uttered in history. Those of you who don't know, PowerPoint is a tool used in corporate America to give presentations. It's a communication tool. Nothing happens in corporate America without a PowerPoint. In fact, probably everything bad that's happened in America in the last 30 years started as a PowerPoint presentation. Subprime mortgages, fracking, started in a room somewhere with somebody having the idea and packaging it in a PowerPoint presentation to bring to a committee. So I just thought it would be funny for some twisted reason to do a PowerPoint. So here it is. Okay, my PowerPoint is called What is Hippie? These symbols you see up here are called reinforcers. They reinforce what I'm saying. That's the whole idea of PowerPoint. Visual reinforcement. All other things aside, we can start with the word hippie. I think we can all agree that the term hippie is a generic term that can be used to describe any individual with long hair and or poor personal hygiene. I'm ashamed to admit that I've actually used the term in this way once or twice before. I know it doesn't advance the cause, but sometimes it is the most efficient way to describe somebody. Be that as it may. We all know that hippie means a lot more than that. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The mainstream media has a hippie story, and the mainstream media narrative goes something like this. In the 50s, life in America was good. But the folks were square. They did what they were told, and nobody really questioned authority. Then, the hippies came along and tried to change the world. How? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But ultimately, the movement failed. Why? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But wait, it didn't really fail. Because now, we have recycling. Thank goodness for sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Not to worry, because despite the mainstream media's overly simplistic representation of the hippie movement, the hippie culture is still alive and well in millennial pop culture. And if you don't believe me, just ask the internet. Type hippie into Google, and this guy comes up. Along with about 250,000 other cheap synthetic Halloween costumes mass-produced in some Southeast Asian island by child labor and shipped to the United States in a petroleum-powered freight liner to satisfy the insatiable appetite of consumer America for a completely meaningless holiday. But look on the bright side. At least it's a pagan holiday. There are dozens of generic websites on the internet dedicated to hippie quotes, which apparently there are thousands and thousands of hippie quotes, such as "Make love, not war," which is accredited as an ancient hippie quote on this site. Don't let the man keep you down. That's one of my all-time favorites. And of course, the ever popular "Out of sight." You can also go to DisneyBaby.com and pick up a set of Mickey crib sheets for $144.99 and browse for hippie baby names, groovy pics for your bohemian flower child, including the ever popular patchouli. If you're feeling really adventurous, you can go to a site called Playbuzz and play a game called What is Your Hippie Name? Of course I played because Meadowbrook just wasn't doing it for me. So you answer about 15 multiple choice questions and they tell you what kind of person you are and what your hippie name is. So my hippie name is Blossom. I was really, really hoping for a boy name this time around. They nailed it. What are you going to do? The best one is WikiHow. Actually has a 16-part course on how to be a hippie. And the course is actually really good. I kind of enjoyed it. It's step-by-step everything you need to do to become a hippie. But the best part is actually the warnings at the end of the course, including this one. People are not generally fond of hippies. You won't get much approval when walking down the street, but you shouldn't change just because people tell you to. Or, being a hippie is a decision you have to make based on your beliefs. Nobody can truly tell you how to be a hippie or whether you truly are one or not. People generally do what they think is right, and if you think the hippies, for the most part, are right, then you may just become one. And I think that's out of sight. That's the end.
I like the way some of that's far out. I like the way some hippie talk has crept into even politics. When you hear a politician these days say, "You people don't freak out now, come on." The president, Jimmy Carter used to say, "Nobody freak out around here." But all kinds of slang has crept into the popular parlance. All right, so we're going to get, that's a perfect setup for us. How many people here are or ever have been hippies? Wow. Did you get the names of the people who didn't raise their hands? That's about 50-50, all right. That's pretty good. I'd just like to say a couple things, and we'll start down the road. Everybody can tell their little story about how they got here. Then maybe we can get into some, what I'd like to talk about. I've always thought of the Commune experience as an experiment, at least it was when I came here. I thought, well, this is a pretty big experiment we're involved in, and the times were what they were. But so I'm always curious just to have this group of people together, and maybe 50 years later, we're sitting around saying, what did we learn from our experiment? I feel compelled to pass it on, the good parts, the bad parts, and the medium parts. And then people can take that and use it for whatever purpose they think is appropriate. But some of you may know my ex-wife, who wrote a couple of books here. She just wrote a book called Across the Great Divide, Roberta Price. If you really want to follow a hippie saga, here's a book for you. It's on Amazon. And then the other one you've probably seen around, the lovely Roberta. Holding some tomatoes, I think that is. And I just happened to walk out the door with the camera as she was strolling back through the meadow, and it's become an iconic shot in some circles. But anyway, this is the story of Where to Know. It's a story of Libre, and basically it's a story of how we got to these parts from back east. We cooked up a pretty good scam when we were in graduate school. This was 1968. This was an incredible time in 1968 in this country. If you weren't born yet, most of you look like you were born at that point. But it was a terrific watershed year. The country seemed like it was falling apart, to me at least. We were in Vietnam, horrendous, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Usually fill in your own term. Fiasco, when you lose 50,000 Americans in a foreign war. They were trying to draft my ass and send me over there, and I wasn't in the mood for that, so this was 1968, graduating from college. People were running wild in the streets. I was protesting at the Pentagon. I was getting beat up with batons and hit in the head with tear gas canisters and waving. I ran under the pirate flag. That was my allegiance. People kept, what group are you with, SDS? I said, no, I'm with the Pirates. Pittsburgh Pirates? No, the Pirates. The real Pirates. I'm an anarchist, basically, in the best sense of the word, and it's a noble philosophy. You should look into it someday. So we picked up a steam in graduate school to get out of there. We were tired of getting beat up. We weren't making any progress in changing things that we could discern. And so we couldn't help but feel what was going on. The summer of love in San Francisco and the communes and the hippies seemed like the perfect antidote to where this culture was going at that point. So we wrote up a grant to study utopian communities. We were doing a history of utopian communities in the United States, going way back. But mostly we were interested in what was going on now. Places like Drop City were magical names to us. And the articles were starting to come out in places like Esquire. And we were going like, we got to get out of this town. Buffalo, New York was where we were at the time. And the students were burning down the ROTC buildings, and we were getting beat up by the locals a lot. It was getting kind of boring. So we said, okay, let's write the grant. We're going to go out and study communes in the West and make a little movie of it and write a dissertation for a master's degree and all this kind of stuff. So we got a van together, got some money, got the grant, took off for, first place was New Mexico, of course. The communes were just starting there. New Buffalo was prominent, and several others that we stayed at. We ended up getting hepatitis. That was part of the deal. Does it have to be that way? But that didn't come along much later. But we gravitated to Drop City pretty quickly, and we were taken in with open arms. Some wonderful people there. It was a very exciting time. It was colorful. It was, what's another adjective? We liked what people were doing there. It was an artistic bent that suited us. We liked the culture and the arts of the thing, and we stayed there for quite a while. But we kept getting the hint, you ought to go to Libre. Well, most of the people from here just left and went to Libre. So we said, okay, where's Libre? And here we are today, much later. So we'll get into some of the early days. Is some really interesting stuff. But building our houses and using these techniques that we've been looking at, and the interpersonal things that happened, and the sex, drugs, and the rock and roll, and explosion of consciousness. Is that accurate? Or was it just an implosion? I've never looked back. I've never regretted it for 1 second, ever. So let's start with Chip Baker. Chip, you want to add a few words in here? What got you here? What you're thinking?
Hi. Well, I'm kind of an accidental tourist in this. Like David, I'm from the Deep South, but I was radicalized in a year abroad during my college years, and I came back to see the community that I'd grown up in turned upside down. And my decision was to get on the right side of this issue. And it connected me with a couple of people, Alan Riback, for one, the owner of the Gay Porn, and Francis Mitchell, a man from the civil rights movement, SNCC, a lot of folks here know. They kind of took me under their wing in the movement days in Atlanta, and I moved to New York in 1964, and had a wonderful time in New York, back in a rock and roll band, had many adventures, and then got tired of that. I didn't particularly like the life, and as a kind of experiment, our experiment happened in Vermont. A couple of us from the band and some folks, Elaine's friends from the movement and a couple of my friends, I went to the apple orchards of southern Vermont, and we built a teepee from Reginald Gladys Loudon's book. They didn't have any lodgepole pines, so we bought some 2x4s and nailed them together and stripped them down, made them look like toothpicks. we glued, Elaine and Tracy Batiste glued these long stretches of cloth together. We actually built a teepee, and we liked it a lot. This was, I guess, 1965, maybe 66, sometime in the mid-60s. We finished up our work, and I was in a rock and roll band, and I left that in '68, and a short trip through California, and Robert Sussman and Jonathan Haylock and Jonathan Gordon and I decided to take a trip in January of 1969, and we kind of toured around New Mexico and southern Colorado, went to Drop City, and heard about a conference called Alloy. And we went to Alloy, and it was a life-changing experience in a lot of ways for me. Alan Ribak gave me a guitar for one thing, which was a great trip. I still have it. And I met Dean and folks from Libre. Danny Lyon, a friend of ours, was there shooting stuff with Robert Frank, and so we were kind of connected to a part of things, but not to the Commune movement. Other than the folks at Drop City had sent us there. Anyway, I came back out with Robert and some other folks that summer, and we called ourselves the Pigs and Fishes, being the stubbornest of all animals who are the most difficult to convince, and represented inner truth. I got that from Dean Chang, and we decided that's who we were. So we got a donation from a friend who was philanthropic in those days, and came out, and Pigs and Fishes kind of dissolved over that year, and I came back out with the AAA rock and roll band the next year. So we were kind of accidental tourists. We were looking for a lot of things. Unlike Izzy, we wanted to change the world, I think, but we wanted to do it with music, and I thought we were going to come build a recording studio and make records. That as Trixie wrote in a song, if I grew up in the Wherefordno Valley, I'd run to the city and do it in the alley. So they cranked it up and moved to Denver, and I moved out in the winter times and went fishing in the Northeast out of Cape Cod for a few years. But we had a long stay in the Wherefordno Valley. We spent 10 years up in the valley and another 10 years in Walsenburg. We built a radio station there. We sold that in '89 and headed on into Denver to seek our fortunes in other areas. But that time, that 10 years of transition for us up in the mountains, it gave us our roots.
I often say that when people ask me how I go different places, I say that my husband just dragged me there. I would, well, that'll come later, but when I think about the early years, I remember trying to make a fire in a wood stove and crying because I didn't know how to do it. Chip was an Eagle Scout, he was the youngest Eagle Scout. And it was pretty tough. But I like to think there's an interesting thing when you think about karma and the coincidences of our lives. We came, how we got here really, my roommate from college, who was Trixie, some of you know Trixie, she was on the West Coast, and when Chip's band left the East Coast for the West Coast, we went to see Trixie in Novato and met the AAA. And I think about when I was in, before I went to college, I applied to the University of Chicago, but I took a year off and they didn't allow that, or they didn't write back when I said, can I take a year off? But Radcliffe did, so I went to Harvard instead of the University of Chicago. I think if I had gone to the University of Chicago, I ended up here anyway. So, because all the AAA from the University of Chicago and Stanford, and that's how they got together. So there's something that pulls us places that we don't necessarily understand when it's happening, but I think when I look back in my life, there are no accidents in my life. And the Communes was a great no accident.
When we talk about 1968, it wasn't just America that was going through a lot. There was a revolt in Poland and Czechoslovakia. That's when the Berlin Wall went up. Berlin was split into 3 factions, I believe. And there was a lot of tumultuous stuff happening. People were sick of fascism. And I personally am really sick of fascism right now. Yeah. I think our country has got everybody really and afraid to be themselves and anesthetized with these screens and their thumbs. Like Pat said, you need your whole hand, not just your thumb. And it just didn't happen. It was a repressive society. I was born and raised in Minnesota, which is a lot of Nordic Europeans where you mustn't express much emotion. And I was way too passionate for that. You know, I had to get a mountain to blow all that stuff out. And it didn't happen exactly that way. My ceramics teacher at the University of Minnesota, I was complaining to him about working too much and going to college and saying, I don't want to be any of this shit that they're teaching me. And he said, quit school and make art. Yeah. And I have never regretted taking his advice. So then I happened to go to San Francisco, not knowing there was a movement there, or that there were hippies, or that anything was happening in the world. And I hit San Francisco, and it's like, woohoo. And the mime troupe was really hot then, and there was street theater on the streets every day, and there was, I hit the 2 big be-ins, and then after that, we all ran around saying, we're sold out. There were these tour buses going through 8th Street, taking pictures of the hippies. And later, when I saw that French documentary, there were a lot of kids there. There were a lot of youth, American youth there. But then there was a kind of a mass movement where a lot of the diggers went to Northern California, and we happened to be part of the crew that went to New Mexico, the Southwest contingent. And that's when we met Steve Baird and Rick Klein and Finn Steen, and there was the start of a movement there. And so Steve Raines and I were on our BMW, and we helped start New Buffalo in 1967. And then that was short-lived. It was 40 maniacs living together that didn't know each other, and 40 guests a day. And we would cook for those people on an open fire and an Orono to bake the bread. And I was raised in a big Irish Catholic family. You know, we had to share one bathroom with 5 kids. but try sharing a 6-hole outhouse. I mean, there was a lot of experimenting, and you had to get used to a lot of stuff. But it was also really exciting and really fun. And I think what we experienced too, like when people say, how did it fail? How can you say it failed? It was a free university. We got to choose. We had time. We didn't have a big mortgage payment. Of course, we didn't have any money. So it was a lot of work. If you didn't provide for yourself before winter, you were screwed. And we had our kids in teepees, and like Elaine said, you did a lot of crying over that cook stove that you couldn't get fired up. And but it was a university where we got to be ourselves. We chose not to accept the social norm of how you're supposed to act. And we goofed up a lot. And we also we did some great things. Of self-development is what I would say. You had enough time to pick your major. You didn't know maybe why you went to Libre, but then you found your passion, your love of things you like to do. By building my own house at 19, I became a builder for 40 years. And I loved every minute of it. And cooking for 40 people on a commune on open fire. I also had restaurants, which I love too, and we tried to create a lot of culture in our restaurants with John Ashton's plays and Rick Klein and what's that lady's name? The older lady that played the Second World War, Spanish tunes. I forget her name. But
Jenny Vincent.
Yeah, Jenny Vincent. Yeah. And we tried to do a lot of fun things like political skits. Remember Izzy, the No Moa skit? That was really a blast. And we continued to create culture through our lives. It didn't quit. It didn't fail. We're still here.
She was the producer of a great theater piece, which was the oral history of the Huerfano Valley. It's one of the great theater things I've ever seen. And she did it, and it should be somewhere. But anyway, my own personal history is somewhat different because I'm ancient. I'm really old. Depression baby. And I had a good life. Southern California, I was surfing a lot and not paying attention to how things were going too much. And I got drafted and sent to Korea. And before I even got there, I turned into a beatnik. I just didn't want to have anything to do with any of it, but I was already stuck. It wasn't like I was really strong and not neurotic or anything. There was no way I could get up and say that I was sick or crazy or anything. That came later, people knew stuff like that. But in Korea, it really wasn't possible to, it wasn't something happening, being a conscientious objector. So anyway, I thought, oh, what the hell, I like to go camping anyway. And that's not what it was. And things got worse and worse, and it was really clearly the worst time of my whole life. And so when I got out, I just wouldn't have anything to do with the United States. I went straight to Mexico. And I was known in Mexico as Trotsky because I was this radical character. It was obviously not a tourist. And what is this guy doing? And I started painting because I always really wanted to paint my whole life. And I thought nobody's going to tell me what to do ever again, no matter what. And so then, in a way, by having such an attitude, I was guided along, like Elaine said, things happen. Like Pat says, you don't have to have a pre-idea. This is happening. So anyway, I ended up at the art school in San Francisco. And that was a very neat time. And we did a lot of radical things with the little gallery that I was part of, which was the Sixth Gallery that was where Ginsberg had first read Howl and a lot of the great poets were there, and the idea that paintings and poetry and sculpture and music and jazz would happen together was, I thought that was the way it should be. I always thought that was the way it should be. And so the only thing at the art school that, I had some really good teachers and a good experience there, but the teachers were saying, don't go to New York, that's terrible, that's the I'm standing on it. Great, that sounds great. And then pretty soon had a group of friends and we had a gallery there, and it seemed like at that time in the early 60s that you could do anything. And maybe it was partly youth, but it was also a time in America that whatever you could think of, you could just do it. And I had an epiphany. I was actually walking in a protest against the Vietnam War, and we broke off and we were running down through Times Square, and there was a lot of violence happening. And bricks were going through the bank windows and stuff, and I thought, oh my God, I gotta stop painting and just get an Uzi and kill all of that. Or else I should just do it exactly the way I want to, which in fact really truly wasn't New York City. Art profession and all that stuff that goes along with that. And so I just walked, didn't have any money or any real dreams about it. But we'd had a show in Denver, and I spent little times in the mountain at that time before, and I thought I could be here. This is where I could actually be somehow. And so I went back to Colorado, and a whole series of events, amazing synchronicities. I don't know what you would call these magic things that happen over and over. But finally, through Bill Thatch, who was a painter and real estate man here in the county, he showed us the land. And he said, well, this land, it's not really any good. It's just rocks and up in the hills there. He said, you can't run any cows. And I said, I don't want to run any cows. And it was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my life. And it still is, 47 years later. And we had had shows with the gallery in New York of one of our members was a guy who'd studied with Bucky Fuller. So he had a show of domes, and I saw these domes, and I thought, oh, I'm going to have one of those. I got to do one of those. And then we got out to the heel, on the Purgatory River in Vigil, right? And it's like, whoa, to start Libre. And they said, oh, you guys must be from Drop City. I thought, well, what? Why would they say that? There were two guys that I met in New York in '65. They were traveling around trying to get some money for the community. And I had a good rapport with these guys. And they showed me a little Polaroid of Drop City. They said, you gotta come there. And I said, no way. I thought in the back of my head, I would never go to that place. That was all out of focus. Oh, man. And then he said, well, you're from Drop City. I said, why would you say that? How would you know these guys I met in New York? I didn't know where they said Trinidad. They probably told me that, but I had no idea where it was. And they said, oh no, it's just 30 miles over here. So we went straight there. And here was the droppers, and here was the guys that I met. Actually, Bernowski had already left, but Clark was there, and he was trying to paint. And he was painting on the kitchen table, and the dogs and the kids were running around on the kitchen table. And God, I said, Clark, why don't you have a studio, man? This is like that. And they had many rules there. Not really rules, but principles by which to live. And one of them was that everybody's welcome, which in America is a disaster. We're all one, is another matter. What? I'm not one of these guys. I got all these weird clothes. Anyway, I was still reading. Like I was a leader, I was a worker, you know, I was a But anyway, I told Clark, we're going to find land. We had no suddenly not getting a job. But I said, I told the clerk, I said, I really don't want to build a dome exactly like it. You had a 40-foot geodesic dome there, and it was exactly like the models that I had in the gallery a couple of years before that. So he said, oh, okay, so it was, I mean, it was really squalid. And he took a napkin, a paper napkin, and he wrote these 5 figures, which is all you actually need to make a dome. And he said, just multiply this time your diameter and you got it. I don't know much about carpentry, but I'll go along with that. And so we built our dome for $700. And actually Drop City got the Bucky Fuller Award for building that 40-foot dome for free. But we're not talking about labor, we're talking about they didn't spend any money. As a consequence, it was not usable. I mean, Steve Barrett designed these steel car tops. It was a great idea. It was a beautiful, most beautiful dome you'll ever see. But it leaked like a seal. They had to seal up all that metal. And they put some tar, and then they ran out of, so whatever. And but every time I would go to Drop City, I'd sit in that empty dome and think, well, I could have one just like this, except I'm going to actually buy 2x4 instead of splicing. I'm going to buy nails because they had all these rusty bent nails that got trash. I mean, it was a miracle. They built a 40-foot geodesic dome for no money. And they did a bunch of zones that Steve had designed, and they were really fabulous. So the first couple of houses that they did were a geodesic dome and a zone, which was a big one too. It was like a three-wing dome. And that's when I found out that it was much better for a 4x8 sheet than a geodesic dome, which meant a lot of splicing and stuff to get it to fit. But anyway, $700. They thought, the droppers thought I was really bourgeois. But my dome is still there. Still there, and it was $700, and we're talking low-cost housing.
Islands, no less.
On telephone poles. The joists of it and the telephone poles were all free. I mean, it was kind of a midnight raid, but we raided all the old homes that were here and Gardner. And there were joists in there with sort of wood beams that you couldn't possibly buy right now, like 30 foot by 2 feet by 3 feet. Oh my God, straight 19th century. I mean, oh my God, this thing was so beautiful. So whoever takes my dome apart will eventually find something under there that's worth a lot more than the dome.
There's a good story about those joists. Remember, it was Tony Magar, you, Steve, me. We were all tearing down this old tipple to the major mine. And we couldn't get the railroad off of the track off of the tipple. So Tony Magar brings his torch. So we torch all the things. Well, all this wood is just soaked in coal oil.
It's on top of the tailings.
Right.
Half a mile high.
Yeah, and so, and our deal with the owner was that we'd leave him half of the wood that for our, we always considered ourselves as free for the labor, which was a lot of labor. And so that night we decided, should we take them all or should we be honorable? And we chose honorable and burned it down to the ground. And it burned, we show up the next day with our crowbars and everything. It's gone, all that great lumber. So it was like, the city bumpkins, they screw up really well.
Screwed up. And finally somebody goes in on this other mine getting things, and somebody said, I know the guy that owns that mine. So I went to him and said, we really could use some of the lumber there. And he said, thank God you've come. He said, some fools are taking it all apart, they're gonna die over there. We could have done that in the first place. There were a couple of things that happened in Drop City that I wanted to mention, and one, there were two principles that Libre has been based on that make it quite different than the normal life of American capitalism. And one of them is that all of our decisions, our political meetings would happen in a circle, and this would be like the Indian circle. It was based on an Indian idea where everybody was equal. There's not a boss, there's not a president or anything. It goes around, and nothing is agreed upon until everybody agrees on it. And when it's 100%, then it can happen. And this was a fantastic idea that I don't recommend ever to
Yeah, right. It was awful.
Don't listen to that. Okay, we're still doing it that way. And the thing that I did learn in previous communes in San Francisco and New York is that you don't really want to make a group of people that all agree about everything and all look alike and they all do nice things together. If you want to live, you make sure that each person that comes in there is completely different than the other ones. We want nothing but alphas, alpha women and alpha men, and we could deal with that. And that makes it really hard. I mean, that is so hard that it's ridiculous. But anyway, we're still using that one. And the other one was that we didn't own the land. We all owned it together. And so no part of it could be subdivided or rented or sold or anyway dealt with without 100% agreement of everybody, which I knew because I knew the people well enough was never going to happen. You know? There would be somebody that say, wait a minute, that's not a great idea. We're not going to sublet it. So it's still intact. Now the thing with Drop City was that it was an experiment. It was basically always an experiment. And they didn't last very long, and they didn't build in the sense they were going to stay in these houses forever. Everything was kind of quick and bam, and it was over with. And now there's this huge celebrations for this place that bid it in like 4 years' time. But as far as like what you mean by the genesis of things, I love that place. And I do think of it as a seed for a whole lot of things that have happened since then. Even if the people who built it are all kind of cranky about it. It's good, you know, it worked for them and it worked for us. And we're still here. Well, thank you.
Well, kind of a different story, Josh. I don't have any of this wonderful background that these people have. I went to the University of Chicago and Berkeley and Stanford. I did graduate from college, but it was in Kentucky. And then the only thing we really did that was dramatic was we went to the black church and we taught them the words to "We Shall Overcome." They said, yeah, they said that we sang pretty good for white people. And I didn't do anything too drastic. I taught school in Kentucky for 3 years, and then we moved to husband number one, and I moved to DeKalb, Illinois, and he taught at the university, and then I had a baby, and then I got a divorce, and I hated to leave because I had everything. Suburbia, I had matching washer and dryer, I had shag carpeting, and everything. Turntable down on the place, the cement blocks on the floor, it was really cool. And then I got a divorce, and I picked the farthest place I could go where I knew somebody, and that was Denver. And so then I came here, and some people who lived here helped me get an apartment and get it together, and then some people from Red Rocks came up to buy supplies to build a 60-foot dome. And one of them was from my hometown. So I came back with them. And they had moved there from mostly Beverly Hills in Kentucky. And yeah. And so they were building a 60-foot dome, and I came back with them, and I've been here ever since. I started teaching at Gardner School, and I taught there for about 27 years. I taught middle school, and had a wonderful time. And I'm so happy I was able to be a part of all this. I've never regretted it.
Help teach all our kids. One of the great institutions, Gardner Elementary School. And it had a genesis at a place that I lived. Sort of a genesis. Lynn Ganesta, starting the preschool. At a place we call the farm. That's where it's been used for a lot of different places. I'm from the Amish wing of the communal movement. That's a certain level of purgatory that I'll get into a little bit later. But I grew up all across this country, starting from Massachusetts, Chicago, San Francisco, Portland. Went back to Philadelphia in the fall of '63, and that's when things stopped making sense to me, was the fall of '63. Everything kind of just, it was visceral. It was like a punch in the stomach. That's the way it felt to me when the assassination went down and everything became unglued. And we've been trying to reclaim a story, I think, ever since. In '64, it went to civil rights, involved in a lot of that, trying to see if that could make a change. '65, the first marches on Washington, SDS, all of that. My college was a Quaker college, and it was one of the first to send medical supplies to Vietnam, to Hanoi, not to Saigon. And in 1966, there was a traveling medicine show that came around with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert. And that was the end of my college career. As the drummer for the Grateful Dead, Mr. Kreisman said, of all, cocaine was a big mistake. LSD, if you wanted to really watch real television, that was the one. Well, with me, I spent a lot of time down in Big Sur. Pat was down in Gorda. I was right close at Willow Creek up in there during that year of 1968. You'd already gone southwest. But that year, on top of everything else, convinced me to look for something else. And when I say the Amish wing of the communal movement, I was drawn to those buildings in Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde, and I saw a picture by Malcolm Brown of a house he built for him and Rachel in Taos with the folded adobe bedrooms. And I said, wow. I stuck out my thumb, got to Cuesta, which is north of Taos, spent 4 days cleaning myself up in the mountains, came out, stuck my thumb out. A red Thunderbird picked me up, and it was Harvey Mudd IV of the Harvey Mudd family of the all the colleges in California. And I said, do you know who Malcolm Brown is? He said, yeah, he just built my house. I said, okay. And he said, well, if you're really interested in all of this, you should go spend a few days at New Buffalo. I sure did. And they said, well, if you're really interested in this, you should go up on the mesa above us where there's a bunch of people building a communal house. And that was Max Feinstein and Reality Construction Company. And that's where I met David and Roberta the first time coming through with pictures, with cameras, trying to document all that kind of thing. This was a crazy place, Arroyo Hondo, 10 miles north of Taos. This 750-acre tract was owned by Michael Duncan, and he had invited Morningstar from California, which was a big commune in Marin County, I believe. And their philosophy was, yes, open door, everybody come. That was on the east end of the 750 acres. On the west end was a place called Reality Construction Company. And it was, oh, you want to come in? You're a photographer? Well, first you got to make 1,000 Adobe bricks. You're a writer? You want to write about this experience? You stay here for 3 months and we'll vote on it. Kind of a place. And yeah, as a lot of us kind of did. It was definitely old school. We built this house in the shape of a Thunderbird that jutted off the end of a mesa. And when you looked at it from above, it was absolutely gorgeous. But down on the ground, it was just another communal motel. We took that place down 3 years later, and it left the shape of the foundation. And in 1977, Jimmy Carter authorized a lot of money to find out about ancient art in the Southwest. Chaco Canyon, Fajada Butte. That was when the sundial was discovered. Serendipitous. How do you say that word?
Serendipitous.
Yes, serendipitous. It was a summer solstice day. Somebody, one of the people trekking around, went up on Fajada Butte and saw that sundial, which only showed the dagger of light coming straight through the mandala circle on the summer solstice. Well, at that same time, they sent a plane over Arroyo Hondo, and they saw this shape of a Thunderbird. And they sent a crew down to see what it was all about. Ancient art already. That was Max Feinstein, Bill Gersh, and we have one person here who lived there during that time. Brooke Tuthill is in the audience. 2 of us from Reality Construction Company. At any rate, trying to make this a little bit shorter, the way I got to the Wertho was the farm had been bought by a group of, 8 or 10 people from Cambridge, and they bought it in 1970, and tried to make a go of it. In 1971, people from all the communes, from AAA, from Red Rocks, from Libre, from Archulettoville, there were 70 people there trying to make a go of it, trying to farm. People putting cornfields out in the far back pasture. A lot of experimentation that failed. A lot of grief and tragedy and difficulty, and the whole place just blew apart. Nobody was there except around the fall of 71, late fall, a bunch of people from Ojosarco came up on horses, camped out, and it wasn't going anywhere. So Peter Rabbit and some other people came down to where we were living, down in New Mexico, and asked us to come up because we were known as the Amish wing of the communal movement. that we could grow some crops and do some things. Well, we came up and through a lot of trial and error, we did a lot of good things. We did feed ourselves during those years in the 70s. There are a lot of people in this audience who was part of that. People who worked their asses off doing good stuff. And there were so many other good things that happened in the 70s with everybody who lived in the valley. One of those was that elementary school, people staffing that, but we helped to build a classroom on that school. You're Nancy's classroom. We helped to build a clinic, and it served the people well into the 80s. And we had a good solid food co-op going too. I remember making runs to Denver with Pat. And that spirit still continues. What with recycling centers in Gardner, we have 2 people who are here right now who do that for us. And that sense of community, I think we learned about how to connect with people over time and support good things, and it continues on.
I didn't have a choice in the matter. I was dragged out there by my parents. But I keep coming back. I just wanted to, Pat mentioned the bus tours of Haight-Ashbury, and I happen to have a very interesting little...
Split the lead, stone high as on LSD.
This is one of those bus tours.
Straight, square, conventional, also appealing immediately after an heroin fix. A teeny bopper is a hippie in early teens. TL is tenderloin. Trip is an LSD experience. Turn on is to commence a far-out experience is to turn on with LSD. Weed is marijuana.
It goes on and on. There's a full tour. Please, some footage we uncovered.
It ended up on that, towards the end of that tour, the hippies would hold up mirrors to the bus, right? The bus would be looking at themselves.
Part of the experience, yes. So yeah, my father was part of a group called the Medical Opera, who started out in San Francisco around that scene, providing free health care to the hippie community. Mostly treating hepatitis and STDs and birthing children. And at some point I don't really know exactly the full story, but we ended up on a school bus on the way to Omerthana. And I got there when I was 4. And I've actually been sort of documenting the hippies and the hippie movement and trying to figure out a way to tell that story in a way that would make sense to people who weren't there. And it's actually a really interesting challenge that I've been working at for 20 years. I may show a short clip at the very end of this so you can see where we're at with it. And growing up there, I can say for me it was great. I mean, I couldn't have a better childhood. But I know it wasn't as great for everyone. And that's part of what I've sort of been looking at with this film that I've been working on. I don't live here now, but my family still has property. My brother's here. My extended family is here. I feel like everybody on the stage is part of my extended family, and that is an amazing thing to have. Sort of, no matter where I go in the world or no matter what I do, I have roots here and I have this base of people who want nothing but the best and give nothing but 110% support for everything I do. So, thank you guys.
you go, Mr. Brookville. I don't know how much time you guys want to go on. I assume there might be a question or two. Hang on one second, let's see. When you're talking about the land, when we don't own the land, we also don't own the houses at Libre, which is kind of an interesting way of doing things in this day and age. And a couple other observations I was just thinking while people were talking. I was thinking about when we first got there, Roberta and I, we lived in the teepee through a winter, the worst winter in 20 years in the Rockies. We thought, wow, this is great, wow, this is wonderful. We froze our ass off so bad. But we were building a house. Just a couple of sociological kind of observations. I was thinking in the days when we were building all the time, we were just nuts. We were so resourceful is what I call it. Other people would call it thievery, but sort of the unwritten rule was it's not, nobody's used it in a few days or anything. It's communal property. Anything out by the road, anywhere. I mean, we weren't stealing really, but we were. Borrowing for a while. So the idea was to keep everything recycling and moving, like Dean was pointing out really well, building these houses. I think we ended up putting $600 into the rock house that we built. And the rest of that was salvaged from the mines, of course. And straightening nails, I mean, that is really a fool's errand, straightening nails.
Started my career.
Right. But I was thinking coming out here, when Roberta and I left the last time, we're going to go build a house on the top of a mountain in Colorado. We're saying bye to her parents. And her dad walked out with a saw, a hammer, and a screwdriver. I don't know what the screwdriver was for. But those were the three tools we showed up at Libre and said, we're here to build a house. And everybody's looking at us like, yeah, well, get pretty far with that, I guess. But what an education. I mean, you go to these fancy schools and everything, and you just don't learn all this stuff that we end up learning just by throwing ourselves in the middle of it. Animal husbandry, not the sexual kind, just the regular kind. You know? Raising animals, killing your own animals, and slaughtering them and putting them away. We actually lived for 20 years off the grid. Yeah. We lived for 20 years off the grid up on top of that mountain. I'm thinking of back on it now. It's like, wow, that's pretty phenomenal. But how do we do that? And no running water either, for that matter. So, but somehow we managed to scrounge these houses together. But those were the most fantastic times because we worked so hard for a bunch of lazy hippies. They were stoned all the time, supposedly. But we just killed ourselves building these places, and it was so much fun. It was so exciting.
I remember, let me interject there. When I first met you, you and Roberta were carrying 5-gallon cans of water on your back up the ridge to mix concrete.
That's right. We had camps like cantaloupes, as they say.
Yeah, and I remember you guys were going to go back east to see her parents, and so she was trying to put her boots on. She couldn't get them around her calves.
We were in really good shape, I'll tell you what. Wow. But so much of that, it was so exciting to do that, to just build something from scratch and use your creativity and make it fit the way you want it to be. Somebody said our house was like the Swiss Family Robinson or something. But, you know, we mixed with Fort Apache or something. Just these images from our youth and from, you know, literature or whatever we could find. So, hey, look at this. It's big and round. That certainly could make a window frame. Like, well, how are we going to find a piece of round glass? We'll figure that out later. So anything we could come up with, we incorporated into a very, very creative process. After about, I don't know, several years of this kind of scrounging and building continuously is all we ever did. Then we had a little more time and we'd sit around our kitchen tables in the winter and we'd get bitchy about things and we'd gossip and then we'd start little conflicts. And As long as we were busy, we never had time to think about that. It's kind of an interesting thing. So if you're going to build something with a group of people, just try to keep building. keep building something. So then, one thing that Nancy didn't mention, I was kind of just trying to break down the different ways of communal organization. From my understanding, I believe Libre is now the oldest continuous hippie commune in the United States. We weren't any flash in the pan. But so somehow we must have done something right, I suppose, to exist through all of that. And there were some rough times there too, in all kinds of ways. Tragic, ecstatic, children being born, people dying, things happening. But we managed to stick through it. But the two different forms of communal experience that we ran into when we traveled around the country, we went to, I don't know, 50 different communes in that first couple of years. The people had decided to throw in their lot together. It's like, okay, we're going to build one big dome, the Red Rock Dome, and we're all going to live in there. We're all going to live in there. And talk about a pressure cooker. And this, just to make things more interesting, I guess this was kind of the beginning of the current phase of women's liberation. Is that a term anymore? But it was a serious time of evaluating sexual roles, and there was some men that had some pretty heavy carryover chauvinism from somewhere else. So every once in a while we break into okay, the men are all going to have a meeting over here, we're going to talk about what's wrong with those women. The women go home somewhere and hang out for a day and then come back and say, you guys suck. And here's why.
And here's what you have to do to get that
right. So this was it was an ongoing thing in society at the time when we were evaluating and reevaluating the roles of men and women and true equality, what that really means. We were coming out of a pretty stiff culture, as other people here have talked about. And, the 50s in America, if you can remember those days, it was pretty buttoned down. And we were in full-out rebellion. And we had maximum freedom, which theoretically is a good thing. But anytime you go from a society that's really kind of puritanical and straight in many ways, then you say, okay, now you can do anything you want. Take all the drugs you want, have all the sex you want. And we're like, wow, really? Cool. And some people didn't handle it so well. Other people handled it really well.
Like, who did handle it well? Who was that? I was missing that.
Right.
You.
But to make a long story short, I think the secret of Libre's survival, having gone through all those upheavals and whatnot, is that we did figure out not to live in one space, not to try to build a big space. Yeah. Okay. I'll hand it over to you right now. So it's the two different formats. You live in the big pressure cooker and everything. You have the free school, the free box of clothes, and you take turns making the meals and so on, and it gets really tight. Libre, we spread it out, and we have these kind of zones of curtilage, we call it. It's sort of an invisible area around your house. It's kind of like your seat. Like, okay, this is my seat. Even though I don't own the house, I have to pay the taxes, I maintain it, I built it, still don't own it. This is communism of some sort, or socialism, or insanity, I'm not sure which. But it served us well, so somehow we managed to keep plowing ahead, and we're going to be hitting 50, and I hope you'll all come and help us celebrate that day in a couple of years.